I never thought a single envelope could destroy my family. The moment I opened it, everything changed. And it wasn't the truth they were ready to hear. Hey there. Welcome to today's story. What are you doing right now? I hope you're ready to listen to something that might just make you think a little deeper. Today, we're diving into a story where the main character faces a challenge they never saw coming. A moment of betrayal that completely turns their world upside down. Have you ever been in a situation where everything you believed in was questioned? Stick around until the end, and you'll see how the character navigates through it all. And if you enjoy this story, don't forget to subscribe. Your support keeps me motivated to share more stories with you all. Thanks so much for being here. The sun was setting as I sat in my car, nervously fidgeting with the steering wheel. I had just received the invitation. A family meeting. An official gathering to discuss important matters. My heart sank as I stared at the screen of my phone. No one had called a family meeting since my mom passed away. It was strange, unsettling even. Why now? I had spent my whole life taking care of my dad, running his errands, making sure he was well taken care of. Now my siblings, Emily and Blake, decided it was time to take control of everything. I opened the door to my family's house and walked in, my footsteps echoing in the silent hallway. They were already seated in the living room, a stark contrast from the warmth I had always felt in this house. Blake, the oldest of us three, gave me a tight-lipped smile, while Emily didn't even look up. The tension was thick. I could feel it suffocating me. "We're going to be making some decisions today," Emily said, her voice cold and calculated. "Dad's health is deteriorating, and we need to make sure everything is handled appropriately." My stomach churned. I knew exactly what they were doing. They wanted to take over everything: finances, medical decisions, the house. All the things I had worked hard to manage for years. Without a word, Emily pulled out a piece of paper and said, "It's time we vote. Majority rules." Blake didn't hesitate. "I'm with you, Emily," he said, eyes gleaming with the prospect of gaining control. The room was silent. I sat there, stunned, unable to find the words. A vote? For control over our father's life? Was this really happening? I felt a rush of emotions. Anger, betrayal, but also a deep, sinking feeling that they weren't doing this for him. They were doing this for themselves. After all, it wasn't about what was best for Dad. It was about their own interests. They didn't see the years I had spent caring for him, showing up when no one else did. They didn't know the sacrifices I had made, putting my own life on hold to make sure he was safe and comfortable. I had been cast out of a decision I never thought would happen. But the truth was, I didn't need a vote. I had something far more powerful, something they couldn't take away: Dad's trust. The following morning, the soft rays of the early sun filtered through the window as I stood in front of my father's study door. The familiar creak of the door echoed through the room as I gently pushed it open, the comforting scent of old books, polished wood, and leather filling my senses. It was the scent that had always been there, that had once brought me comfort and security, but now it felt foreign, almost haunting. This room, once a sanctuary of sorts for both of us, had always been a place I avoided. The memories of late-night conversations, of him telling me stories from his youth while I scribbled in my notebook, all seemed to weigh heavier now. Too many questions, too many what-ifs had lingered in this space, and after he had gotten sick, it became a place where I felt I couldn't enter without confronting my own guilt and the pain of seeing him deteriorate. But today was different. Today I wasn't here to reminisce. I wasn't here to feel sorry for myself. I had come here to find something important, something that could change everything. The weight of the last few days pressed down on me, but I knew that the moment I stepped into this room, there was no turning back. It wasn't about me anymore. It was about what my father had left behind for me, the last thing he trusted me with. I walked over to his old, heavy wooden desk. The surface was cluttered with papers, notebooks, and a half-finished crossword puzzle. I ran my fingers across the top of the desk, feeling the slight dust beneath my touch, the remnants of time passing. But I wasn't here for the papers. I needed to find the one thing that would give me what I needed to settle this, what my siblings had unknowingly pushed me toward. His filing cabinet stood in the corner, standing like an old sentinel in the dim light. I hadn't touched it in years. I always respected his space, the way he had organized his life and his affairs with a sense of order that I could never match. But today, it wasn't about respecting his space anymore. It was about finding the truth. My fingers trembled as I opened the drawer. The familiar metallic sound echoed through the room, and I paused, taking a deep breath. My heart raced as I pulled open the drawer slowly, as if I could delay what I knew would come next. Papers upon papers lay within, some yellowed with age, others creased with use. But then, tucked beneath them, I saw it, a cream-colored envelope. Its edges were slightly worn, as if it had been handled many times before. But it was unmistakable. Dad's handwriting was on the front, strong and clear, just as I remembered. The neat, angular letters almost leaped off the paper, the ink still dark and vivid. It was a contrast to the weak, shaky hands he had in his final days. The moment I saw his writing, I felt a lump form in my throat. The letter was for me. I remembered the night he had given it to me, the last time he and I were alone in the house. He had looked at me with those serious eyes of his, eyes that had always seemed to know things before they happened. His voice had been steady, though there was a weight behind it that I couldn't fully understand at the time. "You hang on to this," he had said, his gaze never leaving mine. "If they ever try anything, don't argue. Just show them this." At the time, I had brushed it off as him being overly dramatic. After all, I had never imagined that my siblings would betray him or me in such a way. We had always been a family who respected each other's space, but the notion of a fight over his legacy had seemed so distant. I thought his warning was just the ramblings of a worried man. I didn't want to think about the idea of family members fighting over something so trivial, something so material. But now, standing in this room, I understood. Dad had known. He had seen the writing on the wall long before I had. The letter, the documents, everything he had prepared, it all made sense now. I took the envelope and carefully opened it. Inside, I found everything I needed. A notarized durable power of attorney, updated trust documents, and a letter in his handwriting. The words were simple but powerful. He had left me everything. Not because I asked for it, but because I was the one who had shown up. The truth hit me like a stone sinking deep into my chest. I hadn't realized it before, but my father's trust in me was not just a matter of family duty. It was a commitment to something deeper. I hadn't fought for this. I hadn't demanded it. But I had always been there, and that was enough. I didn't have to fight back with words or emotions. I didn't need to stand in front of my siblings and yell or beg for what was rightfully mine. I just had to show them the truth. The cold, unyielding truth that Dad had left behind for me. And in that moment, as I held the documents in my hands, I knew that the fight wasn't going to be about me proving myself anymore. It was about holding onto what I had been entrusted with, protecting the integrity of his final wishes, even if no one else understood them. I felt a deep sense of clarity wash over me. It was as if a fog had cleared, and I could finally see the path ahead. There was no need for more drama. No need to prove my worth to anyone. The papers, the notarized documents, and the letter, everything was here, and it was irrefutable. I took a deep breath, my hands steadying as I held the papers. I wasn't just his daughter. I was the one who had been there, through the quiet moments, the long nights, the mundane, and the extraordinary. And now I was the one who had to carry forward what he had left me, his trust. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need to convince anyone. The documents spoke for themselves, and with that, I felt ready for whatever came next. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I would face them with the truth in my hands. Days passed, and the meeting I had dreaded finally came. The date was set, and the weight of it hung over me like a storm cloud, ready to burst. This time, it wouldn't be another casual video call. This time, Emily and Blake wanted to meet in person. No more hiding behind screens, no more pretending this was all some kind of misunderstanding. They knew I had something to prove, and they didn't care. But I did. I knew this was my chance, my moment to stand my ground. I was no longer just the daughter in the background. I wasn't the one who had always been overlooked, underestimated, or dismissed. I had proof, cold, hard, undeniable proof, and I wasn't going to let them take what was rightfully mine. My father had made his decision, and it wasn't theirs to undo. The house was quiet when I entered, a silence so heavy it pressed against my chest. The faint hum of the air conditioning was the only sound that greeted me as I walked into the foyer. The familiar scent of my childhood home. The old wood, the dust that had accumulated over the years, the faint trace of my father's cologne still lingering in the walls, was all still here, but it didn't feel like home anymore. Felt like a battlefield. As I made my way down the hall toward the living room, I could already hear Blake's car in the driveway. The roar of his engine had always been the first sign of his arrival. His shiny sports car parked arrogantly near the door, as if he owned the place. It was a symbol of his confidence, his belief that money and status gave him the right to control everything. Emily's car, the one she always left haphazardly parked in odd places, was already there too, right next to his. They were both waiting for me, probably already convinced that I would just give in, that I would crumble under the pressure. But I wasn't backing down this time. I took a deep breath, my hand gripping the doorknob to the living room. My heart was pounding in my chest, but I didn't let it show. I knew this moment was coming, knew I had to be strong. I wasn't the girl who cowered in the corner anymore. I wasn't going to shrink into the background. I had made it through everything even when I thought I couldn't, and I would make it through this too. The moment I stepped inside, all eyes turned to me. Blake's smug smile faltered slightly, but he quickly masked it with a neutral expression. Emily, on the other hand, didn't even try to hide her disdain. She had always been like that, cold, calculating, and unafraid to show it. They were seated around the table, as if they had been waiting for me to arrive so they could finish whatever twisted game they were playing. The tension in the room was so thick you could have cut it with a knife. But I remained calm. The truth was on my side, and no matter how hard they tried to manipulate me or the situation, they couldn't change that. They could make me feel small, make me feel like I didn't matter, but today I wasn't going to give in to their games. I walked over to the table, my footsteps slow and deliberate. I didn't need to say a word at first. The silence between us stretched out like a taut rope, waiting to snap. Without looking at either of them, I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope. It was simple, cream-colored, but it was everything. I placed it on the table in front of them just like that. No grand gesture, no dramatic speech. Just the weight of the truth sitting there for them to see. Emily was the first to speak, of course. Her eyes narrowed, and I saw the familiar look of irritation flash across her face. She had always been the more direct one, the one who didn't need to play by anyone else's rules. "Is this some kind of threat?" she asked, her voice sharp, but there was a tremor in it that she didn't expect. She wasn't as confident as she thought. "No," I replied, my voice steady. "This is protection." Blake scoffed, flipping through the papers quickly, his eyes scanning them with mock disdain. I could see him trying to make sense of what he was holding, trying to dismiss it as nothing more than a piece of paper that didn't matter. But I could also see his eyes falter for just a moment, his smirk slipping slightly. "This is invalid. Dad wasn't in his right mind when he signed this," Blake said, his tone dismissive, as if that would be enough to make it all go away. He didn't believe it, not really, but I could see that flicker of doubt in his eyes. He knew, deep down, that this wasn't something he could easily dismiss. The notary stamps were real. The dates were unmistakable. The documents were signed, sealed, and delivered, and there was nothing he could do to erase the truth. I had the proof, and I wasn't going to let them ignore it. I didn't respond to their accusations. Instead, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I pressed play, and my father's voice filled the room. "Emily, if you're hearing this, it means they tried to take over. But I trust you. Only you." His voice, strong and clear even in his final days, echoed through the room. I could see the color drain from Emily's face as the words sunk in. Blake's cocky attitude evaporated in an instant. He looked at me, then back at the phone, and his mouth opened slightly, as if he wanted to argue, but couldn't find the words. There was no grand reaction. There were no raised voices, no accusations flying across the room. There was just the quiet, undeniable truth, and it was enough to break through the walls they had so carefully constructed around themselves. The silence that followed was deafening. I could feel their disbelief, their frustration, but I didn't need to say anything more. The truth had already been spoken. My father's voice had already made it clear. He trusted me. He had always trusted me. And now it was time for them to face it. Knock, knock. Now you're about to watch the best part of the story. But before that, make sure to subscribe to my channel so we can keep going together. The next few weeks were a blur of paperwork, meetings, and phone calls. The days seemed to melt together in an exhausting haze of legal jargon and emotional tolls. Every time I picked up the phone, it felt like another battle was beginning. Emily and Blake weren't giving up. In fact, they seemed more determined than ever to turn this into a war. They had hired their own lawyer, someone well-connected with a reputation for aggressive tactics. It was clear that they would stop at nothing to discredit me, to tear apart everything I had worked so hard to preserve for Dad. The accusations were relentless. They tried to undermine my relationship with Dad, suggesting that I had manipulated him in his final months, pressuring him to sign documents, convincing him to make decisions he wasn't capable of making. The accusations stung, but they didn't break me. I had always known the truth, and I wasn't about to let them rewrite our story. But I was prepared. Mr. Lawson, Dad's longtime lawyer, had my back. He had been by Dad's side for years, handling all of our family's legal matters with integrity and precision. He was the one who had helped Dad put all his affairs in order long before any of this had started. So when the storm hit, Mr. Lawson was ready. He had preemptively submitted every document to ensure that Emily and Blake couldn't interfere with Dad's final wishes. Each legal step they took, we countered with evidence. Every move they made, we stayed one step ahead. Despite everything, the pressure weighed heavily on me. It was one thing to deal with legal challenges, but another entirely to fight within the confines of my family. Emily and Blake were still my siblings. People I had grown up with, shared memories with, laughed and cried with. Now, we were all standing on opposite sides of a battle I never thought I'd find myself in. There were moments when I would lie awake at night, the weight of it all sinking into my bones, wondering how everything had come to this. But it was the next step in this tangled mess that really shook me to my core. The real test came when I visited Dad's bedside one afternoon. It had been weeks since the last time I had seen him so vulnerable, so fragile. The days were blending into one another, but I made sure to visit him as often as I could. He had always been the rock in our family, the one who held everything together. Seeing him in that condition, helpless, weak, was harder than I ever imagined. That day, when I walked into his room, something felt off. The door creaked open, and there he was, lying in bed, hooked up to machines, his breath slow and labored. The room smelled sterile, antiseptic, devoid of the warmth it once had. But what stopped me dead in my tracks wasn't just the state of my father, it was Blake. He was sitting there, in the same chair I had sat in countless times before, holding Dad's hand like everything was perfectly fine. His expression was soft, too soft, like he had every right to be there, to make decisions about Dad's care. His presence was like a weight in the room, and I could feel the anger rising in my chest. Blake was always the type to assert himself in these kinds of situations, but this felt different. He wasn't just sitting there out of concern. No, he had taken control, and that's what really unsettled me. His hand was clasped around Dad's frail fingers, as if he was trying to hold on to something he had no claim to. I froze in the doorway, my heart hammering in my chest. For a moment, it was as though the world had stopped spinning. The familiar sounds of the machines beeped rhythmically, but all I could hear was the loud silence between Blake and me. He hadn't heard me enter yet. He was too focused on Dad. I stood there, watching him for a few more seconds, trying to process what was happening. Then Blake noticed me. He turned slowly, his face lighting up with that same smile, warm, almost too warm for the situation. "He's moved to a private facility," Blake said, his voice calm, as if he had the right to make such a decision. There was a softness to his tone, but his eyes were sharp, calculating. He was trying to act like the responsible one, the hero who had finally stepped in to handle everything. I felt my stomach tighten into a knot. "What do you mean, moved?" I asked, my voice trembling, though I was doing everything I could to keep it steady. I couldn't let him see the anger bubbling inside me, but it was there, seething, threatening to erupt. Blake smiled, like he was doing me a favor. "I took care of it, Emily. We can't let Dad stay here any longer. He needs a better place, a facility that specializes in his care." It was all too smooth, too well rehearsed. It was the kind of decision he would make without asking anyone's opinion, without caring about what Dad would have wanted. I had been his daughter, the one who had always been there, and yet here was Blake, making decisions about my father's life without so much as a consultation. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I wanted to scream, to demand an explanation, but something in me stopped. I took a deep breath and walked over to Dad's side. I didn't look at Blake. I didn't want to. I leaned down and kissed Dad on the forehead, something that had become routine in these last few weeks. My tears were welling up, but I forced them back. I didn't need to cry in front of him. Not now, not like this. Blake was still sitting there, still holding Dad's hand, as if it was normal, as if he had every right to make these decisions for him. But I didn't argue. There was no point. I could see the smug satisfaction in his eyes, and I knew right then that he had crossed a line, one that couldn't be undone. I nodded quietly, a simple gesture that carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken words. I stood up, my legs unsteady beneath me, and without another glance at Blake, I turned and walked out of the room. I could hear him calling after me, his voice asking where I was going. But I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The truth had already hit me like a ton of bricks. Blake had taken control of my father's life. He had taken it from me, and there was nothing I could do to change that now. As I walked down the hallway, I tried to steady my breathing. The anger was still there, but it was tempered by a strange sense of finality. It was as though I had lost something far deeper than just the power to make decisions. I had lost my place in this family, and that, in the end, was what hurt the most. The day Dad passed away was peaceful. There were no monitors beeping, no rushed nurses, no frantic attempts to revive him. It was the kind of peacefulness I had never imagined for such an event. A silence that felt heavy yet somehow comforting. I had always expected a more dramatic end. His health had been declining, and there had been so many sleepless nights spent worrying. But instead, the room was quiet, almost serene. The only sound was the gentle rustle of the wind outside, and the soft scent of lemon oil in the air. The same scent I had used the night before to clean his nightstand. It was as if everything had come full circle in that moment. The smell of routine and care now marking the end of an era. I stood by his bed, watching the rise and fall of his chest, my eyes tracing the faint wrinkles around his eyes, the years he had lived etched into his skin. His hand was still warm, as if he had been waiting for this moment, for a final sense of closure. It was a quiet exit, no grand fanfare, no loud goodbyes. Just a man, at peace, leaving this world with the same calm that had defined so much of his life. And then the moment hit me, the realization that my father, my protector, my rock, was gone forever. The tears that had been brimming for so long finally started to fall, but not in torrents. It was as if all the emotions I had kept bottled up inside had finally found their release. Still, I didn't sob uncontrollably. I didn't wail out in grief. I stood there, in that stillness, letting the tears fall quietly down my face, each one a reflection of all the love, the hurt, the memories, and the promise that had shaped our relationship. But despite the quiet mourning, I knew this was not the time for overwhelming grief. I had already cried enough. What mattered now was not just that my father had passed, but that his wishes had been honored. And in the end, that was all that mattered. I had kept my promise to him. It wasn't just about carrying out his last will, though that was part of it. It was about doing what he had trusted me to do. Facing the battles with Emily and Blake, standing firm in the face of their accusations, and keeping the integrity of our family's legacy intact. Dad had believed in me, and I had lived up to that belief. In the weeks that followed, the world seemed to move at a slower pace. The house felt emptier, quieter. It was as though his presence had filled the space in ways I hadn't fully realized until he was gone. Even though the house was the same, it no longer felt like home. I would pass by his study, the smell of his cologne still lingering in the air, and the memories of our conversations would flood my mind. I could almost hear his voice giving me advice on how to handle everything, how to keep the family together even when it felt like it was falling apart. But the battle with Emily and Blake was far from over. They had lost the legal fight, but their pride was still alive and well. They couldn't accept the truth, couldn't let go of their desire for control. In the beginning, it felt like I was constantly in the middle of a war zone. Their calls, their emails, their endless attempts to challenge the trust, nothing would stop them. They tried to tear me down, accuse me of manipulating Dad in his final months, painting me as the villain when all I had done was honor his wishes. The accusations were hurtful, but I didn't let them break me. I had expected this. It was never going to be easy. Emily and Blake had their own agendas, their own desires for control, and they couldn't bear to lose it. They had been accustomed to getting their way for so long that, when it didn't happen, they couldn't accept it. But with every step they took to try and discredit me, we countered with evidence. I had been prepared, and Mr. Lawson had always been there to back me up. He was the one who had known my father's wishes as well as anyone, and together, we ensured that Emily and Blake couldn't interfere with Dad's legacy. Every document, every notarized signature, every voicemail, every word from my father's own mouth was used to defend what was rightfully mine. It wasn't a fight I wanted, but it was one I was willing to endure. What became apparent over time, though, was that it wasn't just the legal battle that mattered. In the end, it wasn't about who had the last word in court. It was about who had the moral high ground, who had the truth on their side. And as much as Emily and Blake tried to dig up dirt on me, accuse me of manipulating Dad, I realized something fundamental. Their own pride was their downfall. They couldn't let go of their egos, their belief that they were entitled to everything. And it was that arrogance, that inability to accept reality, that ultimately cost them. One afternoon, about a month after Dad's passing, I visited his old bedside. I hadn't been there in a while, still struggling with the loss, but I felt like I needed to be close to him, even if it was just in spirit. When I opened the door to the room, I wasn't prepared for what I saw. Blake was sitting there, casually holding Dad's hand. His expression was soft, almost caring. For a moment, I didn't understand. He looked at peace, as if he had the right to be there, as if he had earned this place by sheer presence. But something about the scene felt wrong to me. "He's moved to a private facility," Blake said, his voice deceptively calm, as though making such decisions was now his prerogative. He smiled at me softly, as if offering some kind of comfort, but there was nothing comforting about his words. My stomach twisted into a knot. The feeling of betrayal washed over me, but I didn't respond. Not then. I just nodded, my voice failing me, as I leaned down and kissed Dad on the forehead. One last time. The quiet gesture carried more weight than words could express. I stood up and turned to leave, knowing there was nothing more to say. Blake's actions, taking control without consulting me, had crossed a line that I could never undo. The decision to move Dad, the private facility, it was all too much. It was as if he had already decided my place in this family, as if he thought he could make decisions for everyone, even when it was clear my father had entrusted me with everything. I had no words, no fight left to give. As I walked out of the room, I knew that Blake had sealed his fate. He had taken something from me that would never be returned. But in that silence, I realized that I had already won. Not because of the legal victory or the documents, not because of the trust. I had won because I had kept my father's legacy alive, not through words or courtroom battles, but through the quiet dignity of honoring his wishes. And with that, I walked out of the room, feeling the weight of everything I had been through. What mattered now was that I had done what he asked, and I had kept my promise. That was all that mattered. Closing thoughts. This story isn't about winning a battle or being vindicated. It's about the quiet power of trust and the strength that comes from doing what's right, even when no one is watching. The truth may be silent, but it's also undeniable. and sometimes that's all you need to stand tall. What do you think about this journey? I'd love to hear your thoughts, feelings, or any feedback you might have. Drop a comment below and share your perspective with me. And if the story resonated with you, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe so you can be the first to hear the next chapter of our story. Thank you so much for staying with me until the end. It means the world to me,